Hello.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, everyone.
Hi, everyone. This is unscripted, this one today, folks. So we're just going to have a kind of general conversation with everybody because we've all got some ideas about what the movement is and where it's going. Now, unbeknownst to, let me just get rid of a couple of things first. Unbeknownst to the rest of the panel, when we had our planning meeting, I filmed a bit of it. So I want to show you that now. Okay.
Oh God.
I filmed a bit of it. So this is it here.
What do you want to do?
Blimey.
Can we hear that? We can't even see it. Oh, there we go. See if we can hear that now.
Oh. Hey, Flaps. What are we gonna do?
I don't know. What do you want to do?
Okay. What we're gonna do?
I don't know. What do you want to do?
Look, Flaps. First I say, what we're gonna do. Then you say, I don't know, what you want to do. Then I say, what we're gonna do. You say, what you want to do. What we're gonna do. What you want. Let's do something.
What do you want to do?
Blimey.
Yeah. So that's exactly.
That's exactly spot on.
Yeah.
exactly what it felt like. So
the way that their bodies were kind of perfectly designed to sort of roll their necks and spare.
Oh, they're brilliant animation, that isn't it?
Yeah. That's the original version of Jungle Book, isn't it?
Jungle Book. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Anybody want to do the intros or the hellos?
I don't mind doing the hellos this week, if that's all right.
I'm happy to do the intro.
Now I was thinking the hellos.
Oh, the hellos.
The hellos.
Oh, you can do
Hello.
the intro when you're good.
Yeah.
I'm doing the hello. Shall I do the hello? It's very unscripted, this, isn't it? Am I doing the hellos now?
We'll do the hellos.
Hello, Ben.
I'm doing the hellos now, and Brian can help. So, hello to everyone who's here. So we've got Amber. Hi, Amber. And Ronnie Lee. Ronnie. We've got Victoria Simpson. I'm sorry I've got a cat bum in my face while I do this, of course. What else would happen? We've got Louisa, and we've got Laura. We've got Bunny B. Deb says zig zig ah. And then good morning, everyone. Morning, Deb. And we've got BC. A new name, I don't recognise BC. And we've got Lynn. Hi, Lynn. And we've got the vegan songstress. Is that Jennifer? She changed her name. Hi, Jennifer. We've got IC. Hi, IC. We've got Karen D. And we've got Girly O. Or Girly Zero. I never know which to say. You have to let me know, Girly O.
No, BC, isn't that before Carbstrong?
Could be.
Not sure. Right. So we're calling this "Where is the movement going?" And so I made a bit of a list. So we might just open with that in the sense that I first had an idea that it's going towards welfare, but then I realised, kind of silly old fool, it's kind of we're at welfare already. So we're not going towards welfare. We've got a welfare movement, and so the problem there is that we've got a welfare movement that calls itself an animal rights movement, which it isn't. We've got people call themselves animal rights, but all they talk about is welfare and don't be cruel and this kind of stuff. So by me saying that's where it's heading, I'm wrong there. We're already there. It's a question of what do we do about that in some senses, and that comes on to ideas which come really from social movement theory. Like, for example, do we just accept that the movement has evolved? For example, there's quite a lot of, we've said this in previous shows, there's quite a lot of animals only people in the movement now. Do we just accept that that's the way that the movement is evolving? In terms of more standard, social movement theory, we've got ideas that the movement is moderated, the kind of thing that Corey Wren talks about. And it moderates because it's grown, which obviously is a good thing. When it grows, it becomes more mainstream, which is a problematic thing, because as Patrice said, that when you talk about mainstream, you're not talking about the majority. And so to focus on the mainstream is to focus on the minority of people. So all those seem to be going. And I've kind of summed it up to think, well, because of my kind of concerns for the last few years, I think that some of the original values, certainly of the vegan movement, have probably been lost. And I'm wondering whether they're lost forever, in the sense that not many people want to either recapture them or defend them. And it's kind of as though this generation, or my generation, apologies to all the youngsters on the panel, my generation is almost like saying, okay, it's your movement now. I'm not doing that, but there's not many people who are kind of fighting, it seems to me. So
I have a small objection to what you said. I mean, firstly, there are not welfarist organizations in all countries, or what you call the nationals. I think this is mainly a British and American thing. People in the comments would tell if they know something different. But in many small countries, what you have is only groups of people, not real organizations. And this group of people, even when they use their own language, welfarist language, for example, and they refer to cruelty, what they are asking people to do is stop exploitation. So maybe the language is not always right, but the intention is. I don't personally know activists that are really engaged with welfare, in the sense that the only thing that they're going to do is to change the laws so other animals don't suffer. They really going to stop the exploitation. Maybe the language is not always right, but I think that the goal, the end goal, is common for everyone in the movement, or for the majority of the movement.
And I see makes a comment actually saying that he doesn't agree with the welfare rights distinction at all. And actually, you mentioned Patrice. Patrice actually very much is on the same mind. She very much critiques the binary of welfare versus rights, and says it's very problematic to have the binary, because one, it's a false binary in terms of that patriarchal thinking, and we're just creating opposites when things are not really opposite. And IC goes on to say it's more of a continuum. And she also says that with this kind of binary thinking, it can be problematic, because we end up sacrificing the individuals who need assistance right now for abstract concepts for other individuals that are not even born yet, and that can be quite problematic. So there is pushback against the whole welfare versus rights binary in the first place, I believe.
Because in the sense that you may want to identify as an abolitionist, and you may want to focus on that, but when reality brings you in front of other animals that they are alive right now and they are suffering right now, and you can do something for those individuals, and maybe by doing that get involved in the welfarist thing, do you really have a choice? Is it a choice to say that I won't do it because it is welfarist and I don't want to dedicate time or energy to that? Because you have individuals in front of you, and I think that you have a moral responsibility to do whatever you can for those individuals, even if it's not what you would you really want. In the sense that I may want to free political prisoners, but if I'm not able to do so, at least I'll try to make sure that are not getting tortured, that they have food or water or I don't know, time to space to walk.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that as well. Yeah,
we were talking a bit more about this in the chat before we kind of came on air, and I think it's kind of difficult. I mean, if I'm being honest, I'm naturally, I suppose, from what I've learned about welfare, so I'm very skeptical about how strong it is as a kind of pervasive force to just make those welfare changes. I think that if we're looking at cases where your example that you gave now, I think it's a bit of a dilemma in that sense of what do we do in some situations. I guess that I would look to, Roger, you spoke about this before, about if we can abolitionize some campaigns using welfare as that kind of continuum. In some cases, maybe that's not always going to be possible, and how I guess being pragmatic to how we choose to spend our time doing these things. But on the other hand, we were talking, weren't we, in the chat about how we don't even feel there's, because there's a view amongst us, not speak for everyone, but we're talking about how are the welfareists actually even doing a good job? Who are, would call themselves welfareists of holding these industries to that standard.
Yeah, because we were saying that often when these issues come up, and you do get this a lot in different groups, you get petitions or campaigns or events going on that are very much welfareist, or that could be described as welfareist. Even something like I've been involved in, like protests against live export, is very welfareist in its strategy, because it's not talking about abolition of obviously ending animal agriculture completely. It's talking about stopping live export, but you get involved because, of course, that is a big part of it that you feel is important, and there are real individuals on a truck driving past you that you feel, I'm here to speak with them, to stand with them. So you do get very torn by that. But I think it's like you were just saying there, Tom, if we feel that the welfareists are not doing their job in terms of the well-being of the other individuals that need help right now, then as a rights person, you feel like, well, I need to say something because no one else is saying this. And Nelly, you said this about a thread on Facebook, that you and other activists were getting involved in a welfare in a legal kind of welfare post because no one else was getting involved in that discussion. So you do feel drawn into these issues. And it's very difficult to pull away and say, oh, I'm not getting involved in that because I'm an abolitionist and I'm going to sit here up on my little abolitionist pedestal looking down and being righteous. It's like, well, no, there's real individuals here that I feel strongly about helping.
Because sometimes when you don't talk, the only people that get to talk are the hunters and the breeders. Those who have something to gain from the exploitation. And I think that Roger was right when he said before the call that the problem is that welfare organizations leave vegans to do the job.
Well, I was more saying that a lot of people have said to me that they take an animal liberation or animal rights position, but they feel as though they've got to get involved with the welfare campaigns because the welfarists don't do it very well, and so therefore, we have to speak up. Otherwise, the welfarists, as it were, will mess it up. But that's a kind of separate issue to what I'm thinking about, in the sense that, I mean, an example of I posted on Facebook, and I'm not going to give any names, but I posted, and I think going back to what very first thing you said, Nella, is right. When we talk about this issue, we're often really talking about the kind of situation with the national groups and the grassroots in Britain and in North America. It doesn't necessarily apply to mainland Europe, let's call it that, and it doesn't apply to Ireland either. There isn't really a national group presence in Ireland. It would apply maybe to Australia and maybe New Zealand, but there is those kind of subtleties and differentiations to make. But what I was kind of talking about really is the fact that we've got to recognize that animal welfarism is the socialized norm of society, and it's the dominant paradigm about how we talk about our relations with other animals. And so I saw in The Guardian today an article which talked about dairy being scary, and I thought, oh, this is going to be interesting. I opened it up, and the first 2 or 3 paragraphs were about an investigation that a national group an international group had done, where they exposed the fact that veal calves or dairy calves were spending more time in the plastic hutches than the regulations said that they should be, to the extent that they were growing so big that they were hurting their backs on the doors of the hutches. And so it seemed to me, because most people will, that's the part of it that they will read, the beginning part of an article, we all know that, media sociology shows that, is that the dominant part of that article was that this is wrong because they're not living up to their welfare standards, and this is where things, I think, slide into welfare. Like, for example, you might do a meet the victims type action, and then you end up getting claims from the people who go into the farms that this is the worst one they've ever seen, almost like this is one bad apple type thing. And then it all comes down to, are they meeting the red tractor requirements, to the extent that some groups have started petitions complaining that they're not living up to their red tractor obligations. This is totally outside of the rights-based position, right? And so to the extent that rightists get suckered into all that, that's what concerns me, because I'm all for division of labour. If people want to do welfare and get involved with that kind of thing and hold farmers to account because they're not living up to the 5 freedoms, and they're not, the RSPCA standards are being let down, if they want to get involved in any of that, go for it. As far as I'm concerned, welfarists do welfare. But the movement issue is the fact that welfarism is often called animal rights, and that to me has always been a concern, because that's the thing that has created the kind of problem, in the sense that we don't differentiate between the concept of animal rights and the concept and the language in particular of animal welfare. And it seems to me that the only way that the public could ever assess the case for animal rights is if they actually hear the case for animal rights. And what most people get is, we believe in animal rights, don't be cruel. Well, that's not the case for animal rights, right? And so, that's the problem from my point of view. Not necessarily if people, individuals, choose to kind of get involved with the legislation, get involved with a particular campaign. We were talking before, Nella, about these campaigns to get other animals out of circuses. And there seems to be some difference there. You were saying in mainland Europe, it seems to be the case that the circuses have had to take out all the other animals completely. Whereas I think in Britain and in Ireland, I think, and people in the comments are bound to tell me if I'm wrong, that these kind of circus bans ended up banning so-called wild animals, free living beings. And so the effect then was that they would then increase the number of dogs and llamas and other so-called domesticated animals or domesticated animals like camels. So they would increase those. So that would be like, we've abolished using other animals in circuses. It turns out that they didn't. So these things are are very involved, as you can tell. I'm rambling on about it for 10 minutes, but.
Roger, there's a comment. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Finish what you were going to say.
Well, I was just saying, my position has always been that I want to test the idea of animal rights in the public domain. And even Tom Reagan wasn't able to do it. Gary Francione wasn't able to do it, to the extent that he left the movement and now runs what he calls a counter movement. The only problem there is that 1 minute people will be posting a meme from Melanie Joy, and then the next minute they'll post a meme from Gary Francione and think it's all the same, because we don't differentiate between these two ideas. Animal welfare is about the reduction of cruelty and about the idea that it's wrong to treat them cruelly while they're being used. Animal rights is about critiquing the use, right? At the moment in the vegan community, we've got this weird kind of hybrid where people say, don't be cruel, and the way that you shouldn't be cruel is go vegan. Now, culturally, that is incoherent. It doesn't work, because the don't be cruel thing is, okay, well, what does it, the RSPCA, the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, the ISPCA, Humane Society, They don't say go vegan because there's no need. They just want you to pick the non-cruel stuff. So the culture just doesn't fit. The idea that don't be cruel and go vegan connects, I think doesn't even work in society. It just doesn't work.
And it brings up a point actually, which Karen D mentioned, which was at 6:17, Roger. I think Roger's right that the 6:17.
That one.
Yeah, that one. So the media focuses on the welfare issue.
I think Roger's right. Yeah, I like
that.
I
thought you'd like that one. And the welfare. So they focus on the welfare issues and refuse to speak about rights, and that makes me ask the question: even if we spoke to the media about rights, even if we speak to individuals in the street about rights, that's not what they hear. Anyway, that isn't what they hear. That's not what the media hear. The media change. I think even Tom, you did a press release for a recent campaign, and I think they completely changed what you'd said as well, didn't they? So I think the media changed things as well. They changed the language, and I think the public don't hear rights, and media certainly don't hear rights because they're so in the paradigm of welfare.
There is a reason for that. Yeah, Tom, tell us that story. But there is a reason for that. I'll come back.
We did. Myself and another local activist did a protest for World Day for Animals in Laboratories down at the University of Surrey, and I sent, it was kind of last minute, but the head organization, I think it was World Day for Animals in Laboratories, sent out like a template press release, and I tweaked it and added in a few things to make it sort of bespoke to what was going on at the University of Surrey. And I provided a quote of actually, it was kind of more rights-based and, about the injustice of animal use. And I thought this would be great. Hopefully they'll use this quote. And they ended up using like one sentence of the quote, and then they took the article that I had written and used some sentences from that article as if it was my quote. So I guess it's so that was a bit disappointing, but I mean, most of the article that I wrote was put in, but it was edited and misrepresented somewhat.
Do they alter the message, but do you think that they really don't know what we're talking about? Because my experience in the street and from a journalist is, although they can scrub the language and everything, they know who we are, because you hear them say, there are the vegans over there, these people or whatever name they are calling us, that don't want any animal to be killed. So I think that they deep down know what we are about. They don't say these people that they want to make the conditions better. They say those, whatever, they don't want any animals to be killed.
It's very mixed up, isn't it? There's such a muddle in society about our relations with other animals. We've had people recently on the show talking about why we love and exploit other animals. There's a lot of people researching this at the moment, psychologists, sociologists, social psychologists, everyone is researching it into how to get into this mindset. And it's really interesting, but it is very complex, and it's complex in society at large, but it's also complex within the movement. Like you said earlier, Roger, you get people conflating very different ideas from, say, the likes of Melanie Joy and Gary Francione, which are very, very different ideas, but it's quite messy, isn't it? Is that the nature of social movements, do you think? Is this the nature that the feminist movement is very, very muddled, has a lot of factions, a lot of different sort of ideas within the movement, doesn't it? A lot of division.
Before we go on, there is something we can all unite on. Terry, you're a disgrace, you are.
Terry, I sent you an invite as well, so like you've got. But...
Yeah, we can all unite that. Just picking up on that media point that was made before.
I'm just putting a little black mark next to Terry's name on his chart. You've all got a chart, by the way. If you're not here every week.
Oh yeah,
Kidding,
nice to see you. What tends to happen there is that journalists are fairly lazy people, which is why you normally. I mean, nowadays it's very, very. Didn't happen before, but it's common now that if you put out a press release, they'll almost cut and paste it into the story, and that'll be it. But you've got to do a lot of work to make sure they don't translate it into welfare, because everybody translates animal rights into welfare. It's just the way that everything happens. So I did the press for an action in Ireland, and we went to extraordinary lengths to actually say, this is not about welfare. This is not about pointing out that this farm is particularly bad or anything like that. And you have to go to extra lengths to almost say to them what you're not saying as much as what you are saying. Because what a journalist will do is they're given the job of covering the story. They'll just bring it up on the computer what's normally being said, and they'll use that as a template. And if that's all cruelty language, they'll just replicate it. So you've got to do a lot of work to the extent that you need then to go back after the story and give people feedback and say, thanks very much for reproducing our rights-based position. Or if they didn't do that, and say, well, can we just point out that that's not our position, right? In the hope that they won't make the same mistake again. But it's a lot of work, though. You've got really. When I was a press officer, you build up a relationship with individual journalists, and so therefore they got to know where you were coming from. It's much more difficult now, because the chances of you working with the same journalist again now is just, pretty small. And so you're almost like working with the internet now. You put stuff out there, and then it either appears, but it will get translated. And, and particularly the headline will be terrible. You might get all rights-based claims in the text, and it'll be animal cruelty and animal lovers say, and all that kind of stuff. But we've always had that problem. You have to go to extraordinary lengths to do that. But because
you got pushback on the journalists being lazy, by the way, Roger, which is a little bit of a generalisation, to be fair.
Well,
journalists are lazy. Yeah.
The journalists are about as lazy as
lazy.
Police officers, in my opinion.
Do you think that there might be a cultural factor there, in the sense that in the countries like mine, for example, that there is no long contemporary history of animal rights as a movement? We didn't go through phases. We didn't go the anti-vivisection phase, or the vegetarianism phase, or the welfare phase. It was nothing, and then suddenly some people became vegan, and we took it from there. I mean, between antiquity and the recent years, there was nothing in between. So there is a journalist has no reason to think about welfare, for example, a Greek journalist, because it was never the case.
Well, sounds very different.
Yeah, but a lot of the times we're suggesting, or I'm suggesting, Francione would suggest, especially in this from '96, right, that we don't have an animal rights movement, or never have. And as I said, even Tom Reagan wasn't able to create an animal rights movement. He went to all the trouble of putting out all the books and all that, and the movement wouldn't listen. And in fact, the movement did worse than that. And again, I am talking about the national groups here, and so that's kind of with that caveat before. But the movement went to the extent of actually imposing Peter Singer as the animal rights philosopher of choice. Peter still described animal liberation as an animal rights text, which is a complete lie, which they know about, but they still do it. And so causing all the confusion. I wouldn't mind if people were able to say, okay, well, I'd like to kind of be able to see a Reaganite type set of claims making compared with the kind of claims making that we've got in the movement. I mean, we've got people now saying that abolitionist vegans, their job is to end the worst cruelty and abuse to animals in the world. Joey Carbstrong says that. That's animal welfare. That's not animal rights. And so we got a confused movement. And as I keep saying, I'm not blaming these people, because they're brought into a welfare movement and they're taught the language of animal welfare, and you go in and it's cruelty claims everywhere, right? But we slap a rights thing, and I got some pushback on the fact that saying "don't be cruel" is incoherent. I'm saying within the culture and within the context of then going on to say therefore vegan, that's the incoherent bit, I think.
Question for everyone, panel and viewers as well. Do you think something that I'm interested, because just maybe shifting gears a little bit from the welfare rights thing, but do you think as a movement we've become, especially over lockdown, where we maybe have been more restricted on our activism, do you think we've become too introspective? And has this been, do you think, part of why there's seems to be more infighting, because everyone's spending so much time on social media? And I think Ronnie alluded to this earlier in a very early comment. Ronnie, I saw it's ages ago, Roger, you probably won't be able to find it. It's right at the beginning, but saying we need to.
It's Ronnie, I'm not even going to try.
No, it was right at the beginning, but it's something to do with we need to be out there educating more people rather than looking inward, and it does feel like we look inward a hell of a lot and go around in cycles. Like you go on YouTube and one person will make a video about something, and then someone else makes a video about that video, and then someone else makes a video about that video, and it's like, God, we're just going around in circles. Are we going to implode like this? What does everyone think?
I have two answers for that. One is that we spend
a polite one
yeah,
and a rude one.
That's true. Social media have a positive effect in the sense that it's easier to put stuff out there, but it's not help. It doesn't help community building. Because being at the same virtual space with people, it's not the same with being, I don't know, at a cafe, at someone's house with other people and organizing something. That's my feeling.
I think that, I would agree with you, Noah. I think that also, I think that we have become too inward, and there is obviously some infighting online, but that's also mixed with criticism and having some introspection in terms of, looking at things that we're doing, looking at behavior online, looking at posts or whatever, and thinking, should we be doing this? Questioning it, questioning others' behaviors. I don't think we're very good at looking at our behavior critically and looking where the movement's going critically and thinking, okay, let's change things, or let's. I think criticizing people is, if it's problematic and there's a kind of reason for it, and it's sort of, informed and is important, and that has to carry on. But I think sometimes that gets labeled as infighting or some, and then you have these, you kind of go back and forth. So I don't know how much. Yeah, it can be exhausting, is what I'm saying. But it does seem to be cyclical in some cases, isn't it? Circular.
Yeah. Sometimes, though, it's the only opportunity some people have to certain ideas, because we should not forget that the main volume of all the literature is in English, and especially if it's a book like The Case, which is difficult to read, people don't really have access to that. So watching videos and discussions for many people is the only way to form an idea about what's happening in the movement in general. And I think those who write theory should keep in mind that writing theory for a few academics, it's not the end goal in a social movement, if you think that you are part in a social movement.
I think it's maybe getting the balance as well, isn't it? Maybe, because I think you're all right in that sort of evaluation, assessment, critique is really important, that we are always assessing what we do.
That's the issue, though, because infighting is the same as movement reflexivity, which is a good thing. But it gets called infighting because people are critiquing others. And I think a lot of it is to do with how it's done, as opposed to that it's done. Because the fact that it's done would, in some senses, be a good thing, and what would needed. Otherwise, you get stagnation in a movement, and a movement would die if it becomes stagnant. At the same time, we're not very good, especially through social media and on the internet, at having these conversations in a kind of respectful way. And it goes both ways. How quick do everybody kind of resort to swearing and being rude and ableist language, lol and all this kind of stuff, whereas somebody might be kind of making a good point. But it goes both ways in the sense that you get people in the mainstream movement who are calling abolitionists fanatics and purists and stuff. And part of that is because the abolitionists critique them for selling products that are mainly made of eggs. But that is vegan shaming vegans suddenly. And it shouldn't be allowed because that's infighting suddenly. So when you call something infighting, it's usually things that have been said about you. And if you then make a point about somebody else, you say, oh, this is critique. So we need to be careful about not calling everything infighting, haven't we?
Infighting has been used as a tool to stop discussions, in my opinion, in this movement. For example, it has been used to stop discussion about sexual harassment. Like, don't report things, don't talk about it. We don't need a fragmented movement. We all stay together and things like that. I think that obviously humans are flawed, and maybe that's a natural procedure. We should be adhering to some rules, like be polite, for example, being polite, which is not always the case. But I think that everyone has every right to criticize.
Do you think that we just need? Sorry, Tom. We're all like really excited to chat, aren't we? We're like whoa. I was only going to say, do you think we're not very good at being around people we don't agree with? And I think maybe social media feeds into that with the algorithms. Like we're shown content that we are seen to like, that we react to or put comments on or likes on, or that we've searched for. And I think the algorithms of social media do feed into that. So we're not actually very skilled, I think, in society as a whole at being around people and ideas that we don't agree with. And as soon as we have someone who doesn't agree with us or we don't agree with them, it's like suddenly they're the other, they're the enemy, and then you have that division where it's like no. And I think the trouble is at the moment is this, and it's probably like individualistic mindset of of wanting to be right, and rather than get something right, if that makes sense. Like and so if you feel that you're being made to feel wrong, it's like an ego attack as well. And then again, then people get very defensive and attack back. Whereas I think if we can be more open to looking at ourselves as well and not having to be right and just listening to other perspectives and accepting we might not agree with people, but that doesn't make them the enemy as well. But then, like Nella said, sorry, just one last thing. Like Nella said with the sexual harassment and things like that, there were some bridges that can't be built, and that we have to accept that as well. And sometimes we have to distance ourselves away from certain things or certain problematic people and figures in the movement that don't align with us or don't fit with our true values. So I think it's trying to be really discerning with that. Sorry, Tom, that was a bit long.
I was going to say, you kind of summed up the problems with social media. Deb had a comment earlier which was saying how it touches on your point, Wendy, about the the algorithms tend to magnify the negative aspects and increases the tendency towards disrespect, which touches on what you said. Part of me just thinks as well is what's happening online, how much of that is a reflection of what's happening in reality? Because if you're having, these kind of challenges or disagreements happening, and there's a heightened focus, there's an algorithm pull to focus on that. In the real world, outside of online world, it's part of the real world, but how much of those people would agree or disagree, or would there be some more nuance there? I don't know. That's hard to kind of answer, I suppose, isn't it? But I guess it's being mindful that maybe we should,
I think on social media, people feel empowered by their anonymity, and so they unleash emotions that maybe they wouldn't face to face with someone. So they would not really bear in mind that there's another human at the end of their tirade or their toxic comment. So I think it's always trying to. I think social media, you have to bear in mind humanity, the human.
Is that's hard, just basic communication skills.
No.
I mean, I was told yesterday that I had Zen-like qualities because I didn't lose my temper. And I thought, well, what's the point of losing your temper? I mean, like, we're really in the position of kind of teachers, in a sense. You can see it that way. And if you don't care about your audience, it's this recipient design thing. All this stuff about, holding people to account and just telling it as it is type thing. That plays well in the movement, I'm not quite sure if it plays well in society, in the sense that you've got to have some cognition of who you're talking to. And, you know, that doesn't mean you've got to go as far as you've got to meet them where they are, which is something that is said. No, you don't do that. You challenge them. But at the same time, you have some understanding of where they're coming from. And so therefore, that means that you can't just say anything. There's some very kind of prominent spokespersons who think that vegan outreach is just about telling what they regard as the truth, using the words that they regard as being accurate and all the rest of it, respective of how it's received. Well, that is the worst type of communication you can think of. It's like a lecturer going to a lecture theatre, not giving a shit about what their lecture is going to be received as. Just saying, I'm just going to tell it, you know, because this is the way it is. Right. Well, yeah. Well, I mean, that's got some merit, maybe, but you've got to think about who you're talking to. We're social animals. We do that all the time. We almost do that instinctively until we become campaigners, and then suddenly we're just going to tell the truth and fuck everybody else.
I think it's different as well, depending on what event you. Sorry, I think there's like a time delay. No, it depends what event you're at as well, because if you're doing vegan outreach, of course, the last thing you want is to have a street full of angry vegans or just being really, really horrible to the public. But if you're at a protest, a bit of that anger, you know, you want to show you're angry about that situation if you're at a fur protest or something like that. So I think you have to be mindful of where you are and who your audience is and what you want to achieve from that particular event. So I think keeping in mind your own goals for that event, that particular event, and who are those people that you're trying to deliver the message to, and what is the message you want them to hear is really important. So it's more contextual than just saying we have to be calm or we have to be this, we have to be that. I think we have to look at each individual event and audience, I would say. X-rated Roger. Oh, Sam, you've seen something yet?
Not sure about that.
Do you think that sometimes we're spending time disagreeing between us for things that are not really important or are important, but we should not debate about them? For example, if outreach is the best tactic, or campaigns is the best tactic, or direct action is the best tactic. I mean, I was thinking that in the history of movements, and correct me if I'm wrong, for example, in the feminist movement, you had all kinds of tactics at the same time. So I see that people are disagreeing a lot about that, but is there a point to that? I mean, you do whatever suits you best. It's like,
yeah, it wasn't the same people though, because if you think about, I mean, the way that I used to teach feminism, which was kind of foundation first year level, was you used to talk about several kind of strands, which did disagree. I mean, at the moment it's even kind of more fractured in the feminist movement. But you used to talk about liberal feminists, Marxist feminists, radical feminists, separatist feminists, and black feminists. All of them had their own kind of position, and all of them had a different idea about where they were going and how to get there. The radicals would say you can't get feminism while we're living in a patriarchal culture. The Marxists would say you can't get feminism while capitalism exists. The liberals said, no, actually, we're more moderate and we ought to work within the existing legal structure and bring about things like equal pay and that kind of stuff. The black feminists were saying, oh, you lot are racist. And then the separatist feminists were the kind of, all men are rapists type argument, which is kind of sleeping with the enemy, that we all ought to be kind of lesbian activists and all that kind of stuff. So there was a lot of fractions in that. And so, that is kind of that second wave feminism. It was much more, but even in first wave, when the only aim of first wave feminism was to get the vote. But even then you had the suffragists and the suffragettes. suffragettes, and they both criticised each other because the suffragettes were condemned for being too militant, and the suffragist was condemned for being, too mamby-pamby.
Yeah, but ultimately, they were all needed, or not? I mean,
yeah, no,
yeah.
Yeah,
they have a blend, don't they? They blend together to create the results in a way.
Maybe I haven't got my position over very well on this. I'm in favour of division of labour. It's just that the real problem with the movement is that people don't, as it were, label themselves correctly, in my view, because you've got a lot of people who want to be called animal rights people and say that their position is animal rights, and they don't know anything about animal rights, but they like the name. Often they like the name, and I've been told this by several people. They like that name because the alternative name is animal welfare. They don't want to be called animal welfare because that associates them with people who they think are kind of fairly kind of wimpy and lightweight, and they want a more kind of strong sounding thing. So other people say, well, what about animal liberation then? And so, Ronnie will agree. I mean, he's never really gone for the animal rights position. It wasn't called the Animal Rights Front, it was called the Animal Liberation Front. But the animal rights position in our movement has never really been able to breathe, because it's never really been able to be kind of propounded, even by someone as dedicated and confident within that theory as Tom Reagan. I mean, like, the movement kind of strangled animal rights at birth.
Roger, because you know your history really well, and you know this better than I do, I'm sure. But I think things were in the movement. Things were being called animal rights even pre-Reagan, weren't they? Like Henry Salt's book about animal rights, and he was a vegetarian, but his book was about animal rights, wasn't it? And I think it's become like an umbrella term, even from kind of in the 1800s, and talking about anything to do with other animal issues gets termed animal rights. I think that's been even pre-Reagan, and I think obviously Reagan is the actual rights writer, but I think it's it's very confused in people's minds in terms of, I think people don't think of Reagan as it's rights. It's like the whole thing is rights, even though rights is not rights. It's rhetorical rights and philosophical rights.
You would get people like Kim Stallwood. I've known Kim for years, and we're kind of friends who disagree on some things, including political campaign. But he says things in his speeches. He says things like, well, the animal rights movement broadly defined, meaning, the ALF and compassionate world farming and all that, RSPCA are all in the same movement, right? And of course, that is problematic from my position, in the sense that is why Gary Francione calls our movement the animal confusion movement. If you were to get people to describe the animal rights movement, they wouldn't really be able to give you an account of what animal rights is. But most of the new vegans wouldn't be able to tell you what animal rights is as a theory. They probably wouldn't be able to tell you what is the difference between Peter Singer, Gary Francione, Tom Reagan, Joan Denea. They probably wouldn't be able to do all that. It all becomes mashed up into the same thing, and it's just almost like a pot puree. Well, pick a label and call whatever you're doing animal rights. That's the thing that has always frustrated me, because I want to test the idea of animal rights. I've never been able to do it. Tom Reagan wasn't able to do it, and so I'm pessimistic that I can do it, because I'm not as able as Tom Reagan, and Tom Reagan wasn't able to do it. You see, there's politics here. The movement wanted the name animal rights. It didn't want the theory of animal rights. And so it marginalized Tom Reagan and it imposed Peter Singer instead. That's the history of our movement. If we were the human rights movement, the leading philosopher of our movement would not believe in human rights. That's how messy our movement is. The leading author, until recently, I suppose, the leading philosopher of our movement does not believe in animal rights.
And then, of course, you've got the whole confusion of moral and legal rights, which again I think is very. I think often when people hear rights, they immediately go into talking about legislation and legal procedures and issues and things like that. So that I think there's so much confusion around rights, isn't there? Around, is it an umbrella term? Is it rights as in Reagan's rights, or is it legal rights as in Francione's right not to be property? There's so many different confusions and conflations going on with it.
Well, Francione would say that's a moral right from his point of view, but like Francione is adamant that we shouldn't go into politics until we've got cultural change first, and that involves convincing people that other animals are the bearers of moral rights. And until we can do that, we're not going to get very far. That I happen to believe in. If we can't do anything about that and cultural speciesism, we're only going to be able to tinker at the edges. Now, the people who are pessimistic at the moment often say, well, we're not going to be able to do that, and so therefore the only thing we can do is get involved with the other things on the periphery, perhaps. And that's why a lot of them will say, well, I'll kind of do anything that will help other animals, even if it's not consistent with animal rights. The animal rights wouldn't do that.
Do you think that this is a values problem, or a lack of knowledge / language problem?
Yeah, the latter probably.
Because if the people in the movement are for welfare and not for rights, then I see a huge problem. But if the people in the movement, they want the abolition of all exploitation, but for several reasons use the wrong language because they are socialized in this movement, they don't have access or the ability to read, 10 books in English or whatever, so they pick up things from here and there. That's a lighter problem that could possibly have a solution.
Well, I'm not sure. I think there's a lot in what you're asking there. I think you said, the people are kind of, they kind of do welfare or something like that. But I don't think they think that they're doing that. They speak welfare, but they think they're abolitionists. So
yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, all the people who talk welfare would say they're abolitionist, and some people would say there's no contradiction. You can talk welfare and get. I mean, that's what Francione called new welfarism. The idea that welfare plus welfare plus welfare will equal animal rights, and he said that there's theoretical and practical problems with that. That's not quite my issue. I've always just wanted to test the idea of animal rights, but you can't get to the front of anywhere because there's all these people telling everybody what animal rights is, and they've got no idea in terms of the theory of animal rights. And going back to the Wendy thing, I would have thought, yeah, you've got Henry Salt, you've got the 1965 thing with Bridget Brophy, which was very influential. Richard Ryder says that was really the first crystallization of animal rights. Well, kind of, but it was only an article in a newspaper. Tom Reagan is without doubt the first comprehensive putting together of animal rights theory. And so you would have thought that everybody had gone before, or anything that was known before, you go, all right, well, this is the real deal. This is what we're going to deal with. And to be fair, that's what did happen for a few years in North America. And then the welfare movement stamped all over it because it wasn't good for their membership. It wasn't good for their P45s. It wasn't good for their careerism, because selling animal rights is a bit harder than selling Don't Be Cruel, because everybody already agrees with Don't Be Cruel. I
think it's also, I mean, to be blunt, this is kind of sad. It's sad, but because the way that the book is quite philosophically dense compared to Peter Singer's book, so it's so that was the other issue.
And almost 10 years later as well, that didn't help, did it?
Yeah, so. Yeah.
But then because of those factors, I mean, Reagan's book isn't that easy. Singer's book is a lot easier. Plus the fact it's more of an activist book in the sense that it gives examples of factory farming and vivisection and all that kind of stuff. So activists go, yeah, all that kind of stuff. So that worked. But then you've got the animal groups like Peter deliberately calling animal liberation an animal rights book. even when Peter Singer asked them not to, or complained about when they did, they were almost like, they were so arrogant that they said, you know, F you, Peter Singer, we're going to call you animal rights whether you like it or not. And he gave up. Peter Singer gave up. He hardly ever complains anymore, because I think he just think, well, this movement is just not very philosophically sophisticated. They don't understand that when I say I'm not animal rights, that I'm not animal rights, because that label is so needed by some groups that they want it, but they don't want the theory that goes with it, because that's not good for membership.
That's always for organizations that have something to gain for. It's not for grassroots. And
yeah, I agree. The hope is with the grassroots. Yeah, as with everything, the hope is within the grassroots, and at the same time, we've got a funding structure and a kind of structure now where the grassroots have always got the shitty end of the stick. However we look at it, in terms of getting access to finance, getting access to organisation and all that kind of stuff, all the national groups are fairly rich, and certainly compared with the grassroots. Now you've got certain individuals who are pretty rich, certainly compared with the grassroots. So the movement funnels funds and effort away from the grassroots, and yet that's where the hope is in these terms, I think. So that's another.
I don't think the problem is just financial though for grassroots.
No, neither do I. No, I agree.
I think there's a lack of motivation, a lack of empowerment for individuals, a lack of feeling like you're able just to get up and do something, and also that and not knowing what to do. I think people feel confused, or what's the best thing to do. So I don't think it's just money. I think there's more ways we could empower individuals.
Yeah, I mean we've talked about that in terms of AV. AV was successful because they put up a structure. Now, why they needed several £1 million worth of money in order to run this structure, I'm not quite sure. But basically, they were telling people how to run a cube, you know. Whereas from my generation point of view, that seems a bit weird, because you go, okay, you get a few people together, you get some footage, bit of music, you set yourself up in the cube, you wear masks. Well, that doesn't seem to be too hard, but it seems to me, like you say, Wendy, that people seem to want to be told what to do, and that's very disempowering. It's kind of counter-revolutionary in social movement terms, I think, and it's a shame. This is a problem that you could talk about in terms of society in general. You know, about consumerism, about neoliberalism. You could go anywhere with these kind of ideas about the fact that people are just not self-motivators anymore, and when they are, it's to do with their own thing. You know, rather than.
Isn't that expected though? I mean, at the beginning of a movement, you have more radical personalities drawn to it.
And as it gets more mainstream, you're going to have more.
Going back to what we said at the start, the social movement theory says that there's a real danger in a movement getting big, and that's because you get a lot of people coming into it who are, you know, and quite disruptive in terms of the values of the original thing. And of course, it's obvious to me, you know, kind of knowing a bit about the history of the vegan movement, you've now got a bunch of influential people who are trying to rip veganism as an idea, original idea, completely apart. They're just trying to dismantle veganism. So you've got your Tobias Leonhardt's reducitarian, who wants to redefine veganism to vegetarianism, and then you've got the activist reducitarians who want to redefine veganism to animals only. So you've got these reducitarian elements in it, and they would say, oh well, the animals need their own movement, as though it doesn't have a movement, as though when we talk about focus and scope, as though anybody would say, we're losing the focus. Tell me anywhere in the entire world where the vegan movement has lost its focus and it's doing more about human issues than animal issues. It's an idea that it's a problem that doesn't really exist. It's just that it's been made that way because people want to take human politics out of it because they're right winged. That's why. That's what's going on there.
Or they're right wing, or they could at least be placating people who have problematic right-wing views.
Well, it's because their idea is that we should welcome anybody into the movement and be apolitical, which first of all is political. That stance is political, but also it's deeply naive to think that we can welcome everybody into a social movement and they're all going to march along together. That is just such a deeply naive idea.
It's offensive too to minorities, in my opinion, to say that that we should all march together.
This is a bit speciesist, but I heard in a podcast, I think it was someone saying it's a bit like inviting wolves and sheeps to a party. The sheep's not going to turn up. I mean, that's problematic. Obviously, it's an analogy, but I think
Jay Conroy did a good video about that, just saying, look, if you invite oppressors and the oppressed won't turn up. And the fact is, the oppressed have probably got the more radical progressive politics, which is where we started from. And so now we're getting this. I said at the beginning, is this movement being lost? I think this movement is either lost or it's in danger of being lost. I really do, because I think it's been taken over by people who don't have any of the similar values. It wasn't controversial in the 1990s, 1980s.
Do you think it's
call this a left-leaning movement? That wasn't even controversial then. It is now.
But do you think it's an element of some of these folks have more platforms and stuff, and they're more vocal? Maybe they feel that they want to be outspoken. They have a chip on their shoulder. I'm not sure, but I mean, because they're more vocal than other folks, does that mean that they're the majority, or is it just because they're more vocal than others?
Yeah, I think there's an element of that, Tom. I think some people do have very big platforms and a lot of followers, even though the people who have these platforms are in the minority within the movement, and there's a lot of people who don't agree with these values and ideas, probably the majority, but they are reaching a hell of a lot of people, more so perhaps than the majority of the people with the smaller platforms. So it's kind of a difficult one to assess how much effect that is having, because they are getting a lot of attention, even though they are the minority themselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah. This is something that makes the movement shrinking, because we are excluding minorities all the time, which, apart from being morally wrong, is also ineffective. And we don't have any alliances with other movements, because we are mainly for the animals only.
Yeah.
So how big is this? How big is this movement?
Which brings me to another question. I know we're kind of over time, but I don't know if we can think about this really, really quickly. So I don't know if anyone saw Cranky's recent video, and he was talking about how we ought to be harnessing the power of the majority of people who are basically the love animals and eat them people, the people who are species do have a real love and passion for certain issues, but then they also consume, they're not living vegan. We should be harnessing the power of those alliances with these people in different campaigns, and then once they are on board, then of course they can be introduced to plant-based and veganism. And I think, and I know Ronnie's here, and Ronnie would speak to that perhaps with the Greyhound campaigns that he and Louise used to run, and that's still running. A lot of those campaigns had a lot of people that weren't vegan, perhaps originally, and maybe not so now, but maybe more people were going vegan because they're exposed to veganism by attending campaigns for a single issue campaign, for example, something like that. What does everyone think about single issues and bringing non-vegans on board to get numbers, and because they're passionate about that particular issue, and then gradually filtering through the veganism?
I'm not against single issue campaigns. I mean, sometimes they are necessary. You see a problem, you have to attack it if other individuals are on the line. So I don't feel, although I would like to think that I'm an abolitionist, if there is a campaign going on for fur, for example, because we had more subsidies here given to fur farmers now, or for certain species, the donkeys and mules, I did it because I felt that I cannot stay and watch their abuse because it was abuse. It was not.
My concern at the moment is how is this going to be organized? Because I understand. I mean, like a lot of people went sabbing back in my day. I'm sure weren't vegan or even vegetarian, and so I don't have a problem. And I think that theory that if you get involved with activism and you're rubbing shoulders with vegans, the chances are you're gonna become vegan, especially if you've got somebody like Ronnie who's going to be at you all the time until you are. But I can get that. It's just that I think from Jake's point of view is it would involve, for example, taking the name vegan out of, say, titles of groups and stuff.
Not in my opinion. If it is organized by vegan groups, why take the name?
But if you're wanting to attract non-vegans, then the best way is to take vegan out of the title, surely. So you're not the actual title of your group is not getting in the way of them joining. Yeah.
This is the issue, isn't it? That we then become, like, I know Steve Best talked about in Total Liberation being in the driver's seat with another, with other, I guess, co-leaders or co-organizers, and that to me is a step down. Just even that sort of concession. It's I don't have experience in obviously in some of these more political alliances, but I can see how it can be very challenging. And obviously, it is difficult, but obviously, it's probably more feasible, possible with the campaign example that you gave, Noah.
I don't know.
My opinion is that you can take some steps to avoid that, like have vegan literature on the spot, flyers to give to people, things like that, and try to control who talks to the journalists, which is not always easy. But I think that because the organizers invite the journalists beforehand, the journalists come there and ask to talk to a couple of specific persons. Of course, they can talk to everyone else, and there you cannot control the narrative, but it is what it is.
I'm fascinated by the way it works, because I mean I'm going to do a session soon, the next couple of weeks with Jake, and I'd be fascinated to see how it's going to work. How non-vegan do you make your group, and in what way do you mean? I mean, like Ronnie said that they made it very vegan is very visible on the Greyhound thing, okay, and yet you see the point is I think that might go a little bit against what Jake is talking about. I mean, I almost think he might be thinking that you kind of hide the vegan part until people are in there, and then you kind of. Well,
he did say get rid of moral baselines. That's what he said. We should be getting rid of moral baselines, as in you can't campaign for this. You're not an activist with us if we're not.
We obviously
But I think he just means obviously not making it prerequisite of it's not necessary to campaign with us if you're, because people do say that, we don't want to stand beside people who are not vegan. But actually, and I came into the movement. I wasn't vegan when I was young. I was vegetarian, and I came, I got into anti-vivisection. That was before veganism was as big as it is now, or as mainstream as it is now.
You devil, you.
I know, but it wasn't the thing then. Like, a lot of activists weren't vegan because you were just doing animal rights activism, and animal rights wasn't about veganism then, if that makes sense. You kind of became vegan as part of being an animal rights activist in those days, if that makes sense.
Hasn't that bird rather flown, though? I mean, people on the panel here, because I agree with that. People used to go to demos, and people wouldn't go things like, "Hey, how you doing? How long have you been vegan?" and this kind of stuff. That's kind of like what we'd be saying to each other now and everything. And so, if you're going to stop veganism being the moral baseline, what does that do to your literature and to your claims making? And who's going to be the spokesperson for your group? If somebody who's a meat eater and they want to talk to the press, is that okay? And so it's not as simple as just, well, let's get rid of this moral baseline, because what does that mean? How would that affect the literature? Does that mean you're actually saying the literature, we welcome non-vegans? In fact, we see these things as connected, but I mean, what do you say in this era where we've had like 20 years of veganism kind of being the moral baseline, how do you kind of de-escalate from that? And what I just don't understand what it would mean in terms of if I was to write a press release or a leaflet in a sense where veganism now is no longer the moral baseline. I don't know what it would look like, but I certainly think you probably wouldn't put vegan in your title.
And there's risk also if you're not. Sorry, Noah.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, if you're not clear about those things, and I just think there's risk in things changing drastically. And you have the extreme end of that is organizations who problematic larger organizations who flip-flop between using that word and in sort of revering celebrities and public figures who aren't vegan just because they're famous, or that's the worst example. And I'm probably not talking about that, but I mean it's I'd be concerned about that.
I wouldn't say that
I was talking to
the veganism as a moral baseline, in the sense that we must stop believing that it's a moral baseline. That's a little different than accepting the fact that in protests and campaigns would be marching with people that probably are not vegan. I don't think that we should change the way we are thinking. If for no other reason, I think there is a value in any social movement to keep a radical core. How does
I was speaking to an activist the other day who's been an activist for a long time, very dedicated, who is actually quite moving away from, feels quite sort of distressed by the vegan movement, and was saying that they think of themselves as an animal rights activist, not a vegan activist, and would kind of almost feel like that it's a split movement now between animal rights and veganism. And so there are people who are kind of feeling that the vegan has become a problematic label because of maybe how it's been diluted, because it's been shown to be a diet in many cases, because of the way it's become like a health fad and things like that, and that it doesn't really connote animal rights for some people. It means a lot. It has a different message sometimes when it's out there, and I know some activists who are kind of moving away from even just talking about being vegan. It's like they talk about animal rights and not veganism at all. So
can you talk about animal rights with a person that has no idea about it and not refer to veganism?
Yeah.
I suppose that they're not really talking about education or vegan education. They're talking about grassroots activism in terms of protests and things like that. Different events.
Yeah, when you say talking about animal rights, and then Nella said, "What about the people who don't know about?" Are you talking about the ones who are talking about animal rights, or the people who are listening to animal rights? Because that's my problem. Is the people who are talking animal rights to people don't know what animal rights is.
I agree with you on that. Most people don't know most people in the movement don't know what exactly animal right is. But the main problem I see with that is that people dedicate time and energy to achieve something, a farm occupation, and something difficult at that. And then the outcome and the footage, it's not used in a way that would facilitate the end goal. It's going on the other side, it's going to welfareism. That's the main problem I identify with that.
Well, that's the movement sorted, everyone.
Yeah, I think we had an idea that this is what might happen, in the sense that, I don't think I think this has been an interesting conversation, but I also think that, it's been respectful, and this is the kind of conversations that we need to have. But, there are some fundamental issues here. I mean, it was mentioned, about half an hour ago about, this thing about, letting everybody in and tolerating all the views and all that kind of stuff. And then what do you do about things like sexual harassment problems and all that kind of stuff? What do you do about people who think that people who wear fur should be raped? are you supposed to just stay quiet and not
No.
critique that?
No, I think
No.
that it's very important to make sure we
But
cannot really make sure, but
loads of vegans defend that position, Nella. Loads of vegans defend that position and say
Yeah,
that's
they
got
do.
nothing.
They do.
I think
So they wouldn't.
that any position that relies to human rights violation or discrimination against any minority should be not tolerated in the movement for a number of reasons that are practical and moral too. We should not stay quiet. I mean, okay, I'm gonna say every time I hear something like that, I'm gonna say what I believe about it, and if people don't want to talk to me never again, that's their problem, not mine. But I cannot stay silent when someone expresses racist or sexist or other views.
Well, this is a big issue, and I think Wendy, me and you have had a problem here, right? Because there's this thing where the person who made these claims repeatedly made these claims and other things which are very objectionable retired. Now there's an actual move to bring this person out of retirement.
Are we going there?
No, we're
not going there. Okay.
But then when a big platform was promoting this person, and so Wendy and I, we felt obliged to say something. And there's a lot of pushback because, this person is good for the animals. So it doesn't matter that he said that. And so we both got that, and so it's pretty difficult there because you go, okay, well, that's crossed the line for me, but not for other people. So, Nella, I agree with you. My politics. I agree with you, but a heck of a lot of vegans would say, "Oh, no, that's okay." What do you do then?
Yeah.
You cannot change people's mind if they don't want to change the way that you think. And obviously, if they think that veganism is about other animals only, it will be difficult to do it. But I think that we should express our own views, no matter what, because in some Zoom call or live, this time it was you and Wendy. Maybe next time it will be 5 persons, and maybe then 10, and some people will change sides. And
the problem is with this kind of behavior, is it enables, or in some way kind of says, this is okay, to have these viewpoints. I mean, maybe some people think that, but and not challenging them is somewhat showing tolerance to those forms of discrimination. And I think that I've seen a bit of a pattern with this misanthropy. This can be weaponized, to sexism, to racism, because.
Actually, Dwayne brings up a really good point here. It is, we're not talking about this thing. It's when you see when you get disagreements about things like pro-life and pro-choice within a movement, that can be a problem. Again, I would hazard a guess that the vast majority of people would be pro-choice at one time, but I don't suppose that's the case anymore. And so. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a real kind of problem for a movement in a way, because you're then faced with, well, we've got the Steve Best problem. We need to we're not big enough to do anything on our own. We need to forge alliances with other progressive groups, and there would be a particular stance that most of the progressive groups will be expected to take on issues like this. But if you've got a lot of people who don't believe that in your movement, how could we then make they wouldn't trust our movement. So you're saying, please have an alliance with us. I mean, it all came into thing with, Best will say this, it came with Peter. Anthony Nutella II would say this. Like, if you're trying to forge an alliance with other progressive groups, and they're going, yeah, but what about Peter? Right? And it just becomes a real difficult thing. But Bess is saying that we're not big enough as a movement. We've got to move on from this enclave that we're in. And I'm not sure that by welcoming everybody, no matter what their politics is, he's gonna crack it for us. It kind of sounds a good idea. Well, yeah, veganism is for everybody. We want everybody to go vegan. People say that, and of course that ultimately is true. It's a question of getting from here to there. That's the issue there. In terms of alliance politics, progressive politics and stuff.
It will alienate us more. Inviting everyone, I think it will alienate us more. I mean, not sense. If we do that, there is no sense to form real alliances with other movements. Can we really welcome sexists on the movement and then want to build alliances with the feminist movement?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's about knowing where to draw your boundaries, isn't it? Because I think we do have to be able to get on with people we don't agree with 100%. Like, you know, someone said earlier, we probably don't all agree with each other on this panel about every little thing, you know, in every detail, but we are respectful and our views are aligned enough that we can collaborate and cooperate. But there are some values and some views that you just have to say, no, I draw the line. That's not part of my value system and my set of beliefs. Well, I can't collaborate with that. I think you have to draw your boundaries.
For the last couple of minutes, I don't know whether team we want to go here, but I mean, this is what we hear all the time, right? Now, I've got a view about this because I don't even believe it's true, actually. And I've done a bit of research which suggests that this is not true either. And also, I would suggest that this individual has got an incredibly poor grasp of what veganism is. So the idea that they've turned a lot of people vegan is a little bit kind of fanciful in my view, in the grounds that how can somebody who doesn't really understand veganism have made so many vegans? If people have gone vegan, it's despite an individual like this rather than because of them. And so if people have gone vegan in the sense that they think they're vegan, that is part of the problem, actually, not part of the solution. Because this is the start of the animals only thrust in the movement, that it doesn't matter that you say incredibly violent things about humans because they're all scumbags and all this kind of stuff, despite the fact that social movements are populated by human beings. So this is very difficult, but you will get this comment all the time. One of the main defenses of anybody who is objectionable is that they've created lots of vegans in their view. As I said, I would even dispute that, but you know, then you've got to do all the kind of, well, that's all the pluses. You've got to then do all the takeaways. How many people have not come into the movement or have dropped out of the movement because of people?
I've seen this playing out actually in a real life example as well, in a similar scenario. In that there were allegations of sexual harassment and maybe abuse to an individual, and when that individual was removed from certain groups, there was a big pushback about it, and people were saying this is irrelevant, this person is an incredible activist and they shouldn't be getting pushed out of groups, and we should not be bringing these issues into the movement. So then where does that go then? So basically, should we allow this person to then just go ahead as you know, coming to all events, but then, you know, women who are feeling afraid don't come? So you get into that territory, and I've seen that play out for real in a real situation. So it's not just abstract as well.
It's very dangerous, isn't it? I think when you have people saying things like that and not almost able to check what they're saying, you know, they tolerate this problematic behavior because this person's helping animals. I mean, it's
yeah.
I mean, it's a tragedy.
I don't know what to say. I mean, it's remarkable.
If women won't join our movement, that's a tragedy. But I think it's true. If we are seen to make a hero and a role model out of somebody who says these incredibly violent things, particularly as the person is male and they're saying that women should be raped, just that, I mean, they've said a lot more than that, but just that on its own should have been enough to go, okay, this is a justice movement. I don't think so, mate. On your bike. It doesn't happen. We've got some really
No, we have a lot of people defending him and making excuses about him.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, probably many people. I'm willing to accept. I don't think that one single speech or one single I don't know, documentary can make people vegan overnight. Most people vegan overnight, but I'm willing to accept that his speech is it was good and influenced a lot of people. It influenced me. It was one of the first things I've seen about, maybe the first one about veganism. I didn't go vegan the next day, but I started looking into the dairy and egg industry. It was like the first thing I ever heard about veganism. It was his speech. But at that point, I had no idea about all these things, the other things he had said. And I'm thinking that if I had an idea, because I didn't Google, someone saw me the video. If I had Googled his name and seen all these absurd things, hateful things he had said about minorities, about people were. I don't know if I would have watched the video. So I think the problem is not if a speech is good or bad. It may be good. The problem is accepting a person that uses hate speech in the movement and elevating this person. Even if one or two or three speeches are good, there are other people that have equally good speeches, and they are not racist and sexist and whatever. Why don't we use those speeches?
And BC makes a good point at 7:24, saying that Gary gives non-vegans lots of ammo, and I think it's true. When you get these problematic views being expressed by high-profile people, of course, it's just feeding into the non-vegans, and they're just going to look at us as a bit of a joke, really, the movement. And who are these people? They're not going to take that seriously. They're not going to take our claims making for justice for other animals seriously if that's the kind of rhetoric we're resorting to, I believe.
Terry makes a good point about somebody else too that was seen as a direct action hero at one point, and then turned out to be a very vocal Nazi supporter. So, but I mean, like there would be people in the movement who would say, "So what?" to that. I think, or at least, well, that's not the important thing. Are they fighting for the animals? And if so, that's the main thing, I suppose.
I think the thing that I also find, I guess, now that we've kind of gone there with talking about this person, is there is a bit of a pattern when I suppose one of the reasons that he decided to quit the movement was the feedback, and maybe it became quite toxic that he was getting from people in the movement, maybe from non-vegans as well, and this kind of, I'm out, I can't take this anymore. But it might be his personality, but for me it's a red flag when you have individuals who have such a huge ego and they're incapable of having any introspection and looking, and when constructive criticism is brought to them, and they can't look at that, and they can't search for humility, and they can't say, you know what, I messed up. I see that problem, or I see that. And they just double down, and they basically say, F you. I win. I'm going to win this argument. I'm going to win this. I'm going to debunk you. For me, it's very problematic. And I think I'd be very, very dubious to follow someone so loyally who behave in that way.
And my point is, why follow anyone so loyally? And why just choosing 1, 2, or 3 people, and usually male ones, to represent the movement?
Yeah,
when there is all this very rich mosaic of people doing different stuff, expressing different ideas. Why you have to
Very rich. Yeah.
continue debating about this one person that he is so controversial?
Yeah, and that's a good point from Maz the Gob, along with the lizard comment, which made me laugh. No icons, no leaders. That is the thing as well, that we do in the movement put people up on a pedestal, and I think IC said earlier there are no spokespersons for the movement, and yet it feels like there are, even though there ought not to be. Really, it feels like there are, especially on YouTube. It feels like there are people who are spokespersons for the movement, and yet, and some of them are problematic.
Yeah, well, I guess that's people kind of appointing themselves in a way. But the general point, I suppose, is that the kind of element of anarchy that was in the movement has probably dissipated. I mean, I know a lot of people of that type of position who would probably be backing away from our movement in horror now. I mean, I know several people individually who don't really want to identify really with the movement anymore. I think some are generally kind of embarrassed by the movement. I mean, a lot of people always were, in terms of Peter and the sexism and ableism that went on with them. But that seems to have died down a little bit in that sense. But there are people now who just are kind of going, So the idea that we can trot up to their door, knock on it, and go, "We're here to form an alliance with you," is a non-starter right now, because they just go, "Excuse me," and people go, "Oh, people in progressive movements, they're speciesists." Well, yeah, and we give them a perfect reason to carry on, because we give them the easiest way to say, "I'm not having anything to do with you, mate." We give them the easiest out that you can imagine in terms of, I mean, we should be challenging them. Like Steve Best says, the left is speciesist. That's right. We should be challenging them, but we give them such an easy reply to that, which is, look, not having anything to do with you, mate. Not having anything to do with your movement, because it's completely toxic. And like Best says in the famous speech, both critiques are right. They say that we're sexist and racist and ableist, and we say they're speciesist. Both critiques are right. But then the problem then is how to overcome that. We got to get our ducks in a row to be able to challenge the left.
Deb makes a really good point at 7:31.
Which one?
7:31.
He's got my
Brian.
I think Brian should be our leader. Brian, do you hear this? He's too busy trying to get his dinner at the moment. But Deb, I think you're right.
What do you think of that?
You'd be very dynamic.
Should be.
Ruja, that's the first time I've seen her little face, because only you just see her tail swishing around.
Yeah. Well, we're way over time, folks, and
I know.
we've still got 32 people watching, so we must have made some sense or something. We've stirred people up or something. I don't know. But these issues are very complicated, obviously, and we're trying to kind of unpack them a little bit, and it's very difficult. I mean, social movements are complex beasts, really, and I think we've kind of almost like proven that. But one thing that makes them more complicated is when they get bigger, which is a kind of like the most ironic tragedy for social movements you can imagine. As soon as you get bigger, you're going to become more problematic, and I'm sure that political parties are riven with division as well. All social movements are. I'm sure that Ronnie would say it's because they're all filled with humans, and that is the problem. They are all filled with humans, So I mean, we don't even have the luxury of being told by the people we represent that we're not doing it right. So we can just go our merry way and claim that what we're doing is right, So there you go. I'm all talked out.
Oh, thanks to everyone in the comments, though. There's been some really great chats going on in there. Really, some really great questions and comments and interactions. So thank you to everyone for all of that and for staying with us way over time. Really appreciate that. When I'm supreme monarch of the universes.
Oh, well, that's all right. So, everybody around to Mazza's for drinks, then, is it?
Excellent. Thanks, Deb.
Oh, hang on a minute. I haven't even got the end thing up yet. Waffle for a while, as though we haven't been. Right?
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Guan.
Yeah, thanks, Goan. Nice to see you, Goan. Is it Goan or Goan? Goan. It reminds me of Father Ted. Go on. Hi, go on.
Go on.
Go on. Go on. Yeah, no, thanks everyone. Great chat. We're all feeling fired up now.
Yeah, Jennifer's been trying to teach me Irish, but it never works because she also simultaneously complains that I speak English. And so I'm being good for it all the time. So there you go. Right, people, I've got the end credits lined up. Do you think we should roll them and put everybody out of their misery?
Roll the credits. Rog.
Well, folks. Oh, by the way, we've got Laura. Oh, blimey, I always struggle. You know this, Tom.
Schleifer.
To do the final thing. That's kind of provisional, really, because Laura is monitoring the things that's going on in Palestine quite a lot. She's in a unique position of being Jewish, but seeing the kind of Palestinian end of things, I think. And so I think it makes conflict over there kind of doubly distressing for her. So we will monitor the situation and see if she's kind of in a fit state to present. But I think she wants to, and so we'll let you know during the week. But
and she also has her co-organizers from Planted Land Team Gaza. She's worried about her co-organizers because they actually are in Gaza, and she's monitoring this hour to hour. So hopefully she will be with us, but I cannot know for sure.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, Elliot, apologies if I said that's a unique position. I didn't mean that. Did I say that Laura's was a unique position? I'm sorry if I did that. I didn't mean that. Okay, folks, I'm going to press this button, and that means that we all go.
See you, everyone.
Bye, magic. Bye, everyone.